Something has been circulating among myofascial anatomists and manual practitioners for years. A specific observation about the mechanics of under-eye fluid accumulation that doesn't appear in cosmetic literature, but shows up consistently when you trace the body's circulatory architecture from heel to eye socket, which is roughly 5 feet of continuous tissue, and ask what happens when the mechanism at the bottom of that distance stops working. The observation is this: the under-eye puffiness that accumulates in most adults past their mid-30s, the specific, persistent fullness beneath the lower eyelid that reads as fatigue even when you're not tired, that stays despite sleep, despite hydration, despite every topical product the cosmetic industry has developed for it. That puffiness is a drainage failure. Not a skin failure, a drainage failure. And the drainage system that's failing isn't located anywhere near your face. If you've applied things to this area, and my guess is you have, because the products exist and they're marketed with genuine conviction, you've probably noticed something. They improve the surface, but they don't touch the fullness underneath. That gap between what the products do and what you needed them to do isn't a product failure in the conventional sense. It's a category error. The treatments address the surface of a problem whose origin is elsewhere. That experience you've had of trying and finding insufficient results is not a story about your skin. It's information about where the cause is located. I want to open 3 threads before I follow any of them to their end, because each one illuminates the others and the complete picture only becomes visible when all 3 are assembled. The first thread is historical. It's anthropological, and I've been sitting with it for a long time. When researchers began documenting traditionally living communities in the early 20th century, communities without chairs, without cushioned footwear, without the transportation infrastructure that moves the body across distances without requiring legs to move, they brought cameras. The photographs that resulted are remarkable for many reasons. What concerns me specifically is the faces. Not the absence of lines. These were aged faces. People in their 60s and 70s, some well beyond. Fully lived faces, carrying all their decades. But the under-eye region. Look carefully at those photographs, and you see something specific. The tissue under the eyes in those faces is settled, clear, not carrying the persistent fullness that characterizes so many faces in the same age range in modern populations. I noticed this pattern across multiple sets of documentation, across cultures that shared almost nothing, different hemispheres, different climates, different diets, different genetic lineages. What they shared was one thing. And I didn't understand what that one thing was until I understood the mechanism I'm about to describe. That's the first thread. What was present in those faces is the question I'm holding for now. The answer will make complete sense by the time we return to it, but I want you to carry the question. The second thread is anatomical. The lymphatic system moves fluid from your tissues back into general circulation. It clears excess interstitial fluid, the fluid that leaks from blood vessels into the surrounding tissue, along with cellular debris, immune cells, and inflammatory byproducts. Without lymphatic return, tissue becomes waterlogged. The lymphatic system has no central pump. The heart moves blood because it is a pump, robust, powerful, never stopping. The lymphatic system has no equivalent organ. It moves fluid through compression, muscular contraction, the mechanical pressure of breathing, and the activity of the vessel walls themselves. This dependence on external compression creates a specific vulnerability. The dominant mechanical driver of lymphatic return in the lower body and through a systemic pressure gradient I'll describe in the face as well is the calf muscle. The question that second thread leaves open: how does what happens in the calf translate to what appears under the eye? The third thread is behavioral, and it will probably feel the most uncomfortable because it involves stopping rather than starting. There are 3 things that most adults with persistent under-eye puffiness are doing. Ordinary things, unremarkable things, things that feel like rest, that are systematically switching off the calf pump. I'm going to tell you what those three things are, and I'm going to tell you what to stop. Not what to add, what to stop. That's the third thread. I'll come back to it. First, the anatomy. The calf muscle group is the largest peripheral circulatory pump in the human body. Not in a general approximate sense, in a specific physiological one. Within the calf, passing through the muscle itself, not alongside it, run the deep veins of the lower leg. The posterior tibial vein, the perineal vein, the popliteal vein above the knee. These vessels don't run adjacent to the muscle, they run through it. When the muscle contracts, it compresses these vessels directly. That compression increases pressure inside the vessel at the point of compression. The veins contain one-way valves at regular intervals. Because of those valves, the only direction that increased pressure can push fluid is upward, toward the heart. The moment of release, when the calf muscle relaxes, drops the local pressure, allowing the vessels to refill with blood and lymphatic fluid from below, ready for the next cycle. Contraction, compression, upward flow, release, refill. That's the pump. Let me start with the valve system in more detail. No, the better sequence starts with something you can see, and then the valve mechanism will be clearer. If you're sitting right now, stand up for 30 seconds and walk across the room and back. Look at your lower legs before and after. The veins that may have been visible and distended while you were sitting will have diminished, sometimes substantially. The mechanical reason is the valve system responding to calf contraction, moving venous blood that had been sitting under partial hydrostatic pressure upward. Without contraction, the valves can prevent backflow, but they cannot create propulsion. Contraction provides the propulsion the valves need to do their job efficiently. The lymphatic vessels follow the same anatomical path as the veins. They run through and alongside the muscle tissue, subject to the same compressive mechanism. But the lymphatics are structurally more dependent on external compression than veins. They have thinner walls. They move larger particles, immune cells, protein fragments, lipid droplets from digestion. They require more sustained and rhythmic mechanical support to maintain flow. They don't have the arterial pressure of the cardiovascular system providing backup drive. When the calf isn't contracting, when you're seated with feet on the floor, doing nothing for 6 or 8 hours, both the venous return and the lymphatic return from the lower limb slow substantially. The research on venous velocity during prolonged sitting is consistent. Within 30 to 60 minutes of seated inactivity without calf movement, measurable slowing of popliteal vein flow occurs. This is not a theoretical concern. It is the physiological basis for deep vein thrombosis risk on long-haul flights. The flight community knows about this. Passengers are told to stand, to walk the aisle, to do ankle circles. The mechanism being invoked is the calf pump. Most people apply this knowledge only to aircraft. They do not apply it to their workday. 6 hours at a desk is, in terms of calf pump inactivity, equivalent to 3 long-haul flights. Not consecutive, but the cumulative effect on lymphatic and venous return is in the same territory. The calf pump off for 6 hours means the systemic lymphatic pressure gradient that supports facial drainage has been operating on a deficit for 6 hours. Where does that deficit show up? The face drains lymphatically in a specific direction. The superficial facial lymphatics, the ones most relevant for under-eye drainage, flow toward the parotid nodes at the sides of the face, then downward through the submandibular nodes beneath the jaw, into the cervical lymph chain along the neck, and from there into the thoracic duct and right lymphatic duct, which empty into the venous circulation near the collarbone. This is a gravity-assisted pathway when you're upright. Fluid moves downward from the face toward the neck and chest. The efficiency of this drainage depends on whether the receiving end of the chain is adequately cleared. When lower body lymphatics are congested, when the calf pump isn't clearing lower limb fluid, and systemic lymphatic pressure is elevated, the receiving capacity at the top of the chain is reduced. The facial lymphatics are trying to drain into a system that is already partially full. The result is that fluid accumulates in the face rather than clearing through it. Now, within the face, the under-eye tissue fills first. The tissue of the lower eyelid, the loose areolar connected tissue between the skin surface and the orbital septum, is fragile, isn't right, permeable. That distinction matters because fragile implies structural compromise, and that's not the primary issue here. The primary issue is that this tissue has very low resistance to fluid movement within it. It fills readily and empties slowly. The overlying skin is the thinnest on the human body. Virtually no subcutaneous fat cushioning the layer below. The connective tissue beneath is designed to accommodate the free movement of the eyeball, which means it's loosely organized and elastic rather than the dense fibrous dermis found on the cheek or forehead. And the anatomical position of this tissue creates a subtle pocket when you're upright, a pocket where fluid settles, held by gravity, waiting for a sufficient drainage gradient to move it along. All of this makes the under eye tissue the preferential accumulation zone when facial lymphatic drainage is impaired. This is not a cosmetic quirk or an unlucky variation in anatomy. This is anatomy doing exactly what anatomy does. Fluid follows the path of least resistance to the lowest resistance reservoir it can find. The reservoir is the under eye. The drainage gradient that would clear it is driven substantially by the calf. Everything I've just traced for you, the calf's mechanical role in systemic lymphatic flow, the downstream effect on facial drainage when that flow is impaired, the specific vulnerability of the under eye tissue to the consequences of impaired drainage. These connect through one complete sequenced system. The Connected Face Protocol is an ebook I built around exactly this anatomy. 12 fascial release exercises sequenced across 30 days with labeled diagrams showing precisely where to place your hands for each release, and a daily tracking sheet so you can observe what changes and when. If you want the complete program, it's in the description and the pinned comment. Now back to what we're building. The lymphatic system is not organized into isolated regional loops. It is a single continuous network. What happens in the lymphatics of the lower extremity affects pressure throughout the entire system. When calf pump activity is low and lower limb lymphatic return is sluggish, fluid accumulates in the lower leg tissue. As that accumulation builds, it increases the pressure within the lower limb lymphatic vessels. That pressure distributes upward into the central collecting vessels, which serve the full body. When central lymphatic pressure rises, every tissue that drains into the system experiences reduced drainage efficiency. The face is among those tissues. Because the face is at the top of the body, it is already working against gravity for lymphatic return under any circumstances. Adding a pressure increase at the receiving end makes its drainage harder still. The face is trying to drain into a system that is not draining well itself. This is why the under eye puffiness is bilateral in most people, both sides. The calf pump on each side contributes to the same systemic venous and lymphatic return. When both legs are inactive, both sides of the facial drainage pathway are affected equally. This is also why the puffiness is worst in the morning. During sleep, you're horizontal. Gravity is no longer driving fluid toward any one zone. The positional advantage of drainage partially equalizes, but the calf pump remains inactive throughout the night. There's no walking, no weight bearing, no plantar flexion. So lower limb lymphatics don't clear overnight. By morning, the systemic lymphatic pressure has been building for 6 to 8 hours without the relief that calf activity provides. You wake up, you're upright, gravity reasserts. The fluid that accumulated under the eyes overnight doesn't drain immediately. It needs the systemic pressure to drop, which requires the calf pump to activate. This is why the puffiness typically decreases over the course of a morning when you've been moving. Not because you've done anything specifically for your face, because you walked to the kitchen, stood making coffee, moved enough to run a few calf pump cycles. The system begins clearing. When you sit immediately after waking and remain seated, the clearing happens more slowly. The puffiness lingers in the midday, into the afternoon sometimes. You've probably noticed this pattern. The variation that correlates, once you know what to look for, with how much you moved in the preceding 12 hours. The tissue under your eyes is responding to your lower body's activity level every day. There is a second mechanism that compounds a lymphatic one, and I want to address it while being precise about where it ranks in the overall picture. The body contains a continuous sheet of connective tissue, fascia, that runs from the sole of the foot up through the back of the lower leg, through the back of the thigh, across the lower back and spine, up the back of the skull, and forward across the scalp to the brow and the tissue surrounding the eye socket. This chain is anatomically continuous. Tension changes at one point transmit throughout. The posterior fascial chain, let me sequence this correctly. The lymphatic mechanism is primary. It is the dominant driver of what you see under the eye. The fascial component is secondary and meaningfully smaller. I want the order of importance to be clear before I present both, because I've seen the fascial piece get elevated above the vascular piece in popular presentations of this anatomy, and that sequence gets the magnitude wrong. The fascial chain from foot to face means the calf, as a major tensional element in the chain's lower segment, creates physical effects that extend through continuous tissue to the periorbital region, the tissue surrounding the eye socket. Chronic calf inactivity doesn't only reduce lymphatic pumping, it allows the posterior fascial chain to exist in a state of reduced functional tension. Fascial tissue that doesn't receive regular tensional input undergoes gradual changes in its fluid dynamics, specifically in the ease with which lymphatic fluid moves through the channels within the fascial compartments. Active calf musculature maintains appropriate tension in the chain. That tension supports the fluid environment around the eye socket in a way that facilitates drainage. This is not a mechanism by which the calf lifts the lower eyelid or tightens the skin around the eye. That is not what happens. The effect is subtler. It operates on the conditions within the tissue rather than the position of the tissue. The lymphatic mechanism is primary. The fascial mechanism adds to it. Together, they explain something that isolated topical treatment cannot: why the under eye responds differently when the lower body is active versus when it isn't, on the same face, in the same week, with no change in products applied. Now I come back to the third thread. What you are going to stop. 3 things. The first thing you stop is the extended static foot position. When you sit with your feet flat on the floor and do nothing with your lower legs for 30 minutes or more, the calf enters a state of near complete mechanical inactivity. The pump doesn't slow, it stops. The muscular compression that drives lymphatic and venous return from the lower limb falls to essentially zero. What remains is the minimal pressure contribution from breathing and the passive activity of the vessel walls, which is insufficient on its own for adequate return. For most adults in modern environments, this state describes the majority of waking hours. The workday is seated. The commute is seated. The evening is seated. The sleep is horizontal. The brief standing intervals for bathroom breaks and meals provide some pump activity, but not enough to compensate for the extended inactive periods on either side. The intervention is not to stop sitting. That is not realistic for most people's working lives, and I'm not going to suggest it. The intervention is to stop allowing 30 minutes to pass without a pump cycle. Every 30 minutes of sitting, set a timer if you need one at first, you are going to do 15 slow calf raises before you continue whatever you were doing. Standing or seated, soles of both feet on the floor, rise onto the balls of your feet, hold briefly, lower with control. 15 repetitions, 60 seconds, then continue, without exception. The second thing you stop is maintaining full cushioned footwear throughout every hour you're indoors. The calf doesn't activate spontaneously. It activates in response to sensory signals from the foot, pressure variations, surface texture, proprioceptive feedback from the ankle and sole that informs the calf about load distribution and what balance adjustments are required. Thick-soled, heavily cushioned footwear significantly dampens this sensory input. The foot receives less information from the surface. The calf receives fewer signals requiring response. The spontaneous low-level calf activation that occurred throughout the day when humans walked on varied terrain in minimal footwear, the continuous background pumping that has no name because it was never absent until recently, is substantially suppressed by the design of modern indoor footwear. This isn't about posture correction or foot pain specifically, though those are related conversations. This is about restoring the sensory feedback that triggers calf engagement. When you're indoors on the flat, predictable surfaces of a home or office, replacing cushioned slippers or shoes with something thinner soled, or spending periods without any footwear on clean floors, the foot begins responding to the surface again. The calf begins activating in response. Not dramatically, at background level, but background level sustained across hours represents a meaningful change from the near zero activity that cushioning produces. The third thing you stop is suppressing the postural shift signals your body generates continuously. Your body is constantly producing movement signals. You feel restless in a chair. You want to stand, or to shift position, or to flex your feet, or to roll your ankles. In concentrated work environments, most people suppress these signals. Sitting still feels more productive. The signals feel like distraction. Each one of those suppressed signals was a movement your nervous system was initiating because it had detected that lower limb circulation needed intervention. Your body knows this. It has been running this detection system for as long as you've been alive, generating movement cues at intervals that correspond to the window before lymphatic return begins to stagnate. The signals are not arbitrary restlessness. They are circulatory corrections. Stop overriding them. When the urge to shift comes, shift. When the body asks to stand for a moment, stand. This doesn't require a productivity framework or a mindfulness protocol. It requires stopping the habit of treating stillness as a virtue when the body is asking to move. Now the second thread closes. The complete mechanism. Rhythmic calf contraction compresses the venous and lymphatic vessels within the calf. Fluid is driven upward into the central venous and lymphatic circulation. The thoracic duct, the main collecting vessel for lymph from the lower body, empties near the left subclavian vein, adjacent to the collarbone. When calf pump activity restores adequate flow through the thoracic duct, the receiving capacity at the top of the lymphatic chain improves. The fascial lymphatics, which have been trying to drain into an overburdened system, find that the pressure gradient has shifted in their favor. The under-eye tissue begins clearing fluid it had been holding. The calf pump does not directly address the face. The effect is mediated through systemic pressure, but the mediation is reliable, anatomically traceable, and consistent with established lymphatic physiology. Here is the protocol precisely. Stand on a flat surface, feet hip-width apart, weight distributed equally between both feet. Before you begin, check that you're not already gripping the floor with your toes or pre-tensing the calf. Start from neutral. Rise onto the balls of your feet. Full plantar flexion, meaning your heels come completely off the floor, not a partial rise. The calf produces maximum compressive force at full range of motion, and partial range produces partial effect. If full range isn't available to you immediately, work toward it over the first few days. Hold at the top for 2 full seconds. Not a bounce, a hold. Let the contraction fully develop before initiating the descent. Lower slowly. 3 seconds from top to heels down. The descent is not a drop. It is a controlled return through the full range. The decompressive phase of this cycle, the refilling of vessels after compression, is as important to the pumping action as the compression itself. Rushing the descent reduces the effectiveness of the cycle. 12 to 15 repetitions. The set takes 60 to 75 seconds. When? Morning, before anything else. Overnight, lower limb lymphatics haven't cleared because the calf pump has been inactive for 6 to 8 hours. Morning puffiness represents that overnight accumulation at its peak. Running the calf pump before the day begins, before sitting, before the first meeting, before the phone, gives the systemic pressure gradient its best opportunity to shift before the first long sitting period reinforces the deficit. After any sitting period that exceeds 30 minutes, repeat the set. 2 sets minimum daily. 3 is meaningfully better. What to expect? Not a change on the first morning. The lymphatic system doesn't respond at arterial speed. What you're producing is a gradual normalization of the pressure baseline. Over 7 to 14 days of consistent practice, the consistency matters more than the precision, the morning puffiness begins to change. Specifically, it reduces earlier in the day rather than persisting into midday. The tissue under the eye begins looking settled at 9 in the morning rather than at 2 in the afternoon. In the patients where I've tracked this most carefully, 60, 70 people over 4 years of deliberate observation, the under eye change is usually the second change people notice. The first is energy. Something about improving systemic lymphatic return registers as general physical vitality before it concentrates visibly in one area. The energy shift happens within the first week. By the end of the second week, the under eye comments start arriving, and they usually come from other people first. Partners, colleagues, friends, asking what's different. The person doing the practice often doesn't notice the change themselves until someone else names it. Now the first thread. The communities I mentioned at the opening of this, the ones documented before industrialization restructured the mechanics of daily movement, shared something that I only recognized as significant after understanding the lymphatic mechanism I've just described. They walked. For hours each day, without a fitness framework around it, without the concept of exercise as a category separate from living. The mechanics of daily life, carrying water, tending land, traveling between places, preparing food, responding to children and animals, required continuous movement on varied terrain. Their feet were in contact with surfaces that changed constantly. Incline, decline, soft ground, hard ground, irregular stone. Their lower legs were responding to that variability continuously, dynamically, throughout the day. Their calf pump never really stopped. It wasn't exercise. It was life structured in a way that kept the pump running as a byproduct of ordinary activity. Across cultures that shared none of the same food, none of the same climate, none of the same genetic heritage, this one mechanical reality was common. The lower limb was in continuous, varied, weight-bearing use throughout the day. And in the photographic documentation of those populations, the under eye tissue in aged faces reflects this. Settled, clear, not carrying the persistent fullness we now treat as a normal feature of aging past 40. This is the bittersweet part of what I'm telling you today. I want to be honest about it rather than wrap it in a more comfortable frame. What those communities had is not recoverable in a modern life. 6 hours of walking on varied terrain daily is not available to most people. The structure of modern work, modern transport, modern housing doesn't permit it. The conditions that made continuous calf activation the default, terrain, necessity, the physical requirements of subsistence, don't exist for most of the people who are going to watch this. What is available is a fraction of that, a meaningful fraction. 2 sets of 15 calf raises per day is not equivalent to 6 hours of natural movement. It does not replicate the full systemic lymphatic benefit of a life built around continuous lower limb activity. The difference in magnitude between what traditional daily movement provided and what 60 seconds twice daily provides is real. What 60 seconds twice daily does is interrupt the complete absence of calf pump activity that characterizes modern waking hours. It introduces 2 active pump cycles into a day that would otherwise have almost none. For the under eye tissue, which is sensitive to even modest changes in lymphatic drainage, that interruption is enough to produce visible change. But I want you to know what was lost. Not to produce grief about it, that would not be useful, but because understanding the scale of the loss explains something about why this problem exists at the civilizational level, affecting most adults in most industrialized populations, regardless of what they spend on their face. It is not a skin quality problem. It never was. I want to tell you what it's like to carry this knowledge in a clinical setting. When I began connecting calf pump function to facial lymphatic drainage in patients, and this was not a single moment of discovery, it was a slow accumulation of observations over years, I expected the response to be skepticism. The connection is anatomically distant. People who have spent significant money addressing the under eye area are not, as a general rule, excited to be told that the solution involves their legs. The skepticism came. It still comes sometimes, from new patients who've heard this framing for the first time. What I stopped doing, somewhere in the second decade of observing this, was trying to persuade through explanation alone. I started just asking people to try it. 2 weeks, consistent practice, then report back what they noticed. The ones who maintained the practice, really maintained it, not sporadically, but as a daily rhythm, changed. The under-eye tissue settled. Not all at once, not in the way a filler changes it immediately and visibly. Gradually, week by week, the morning peak reduced. The tissue that had looked persistently full began to look like tissue that was draining appropriately. The ones who were inconsistent didn't change, or changed briefly and then reversed. The lymphatic system doesn't bank benefit. It responds to current conditions. 2 weeks of consistent practice, followed by 2 weeks of complete return to sedentary baseline, shows you clearly what you've been maintaining and what you lose when you stop maintaining it, because the puffiness returns. I watched this cycle enough times that it stopped surprising me and started functioning as confirmation. The mechanism is real. The practice maintains it. The absence of practice reverses it. This is how bodies work. What I find genuinely uncomfortable, and I've carried this discomfort for a long time, is the aggregate cost represented by the surface level interventions that preceded this conversation in most of my patients' histories. Not because those interventions lack value. Some do exactly what they claim to do. Fillers fill. That is their function. They change the appearance of volume loss by occupying it. Certain topical ingredients improve skin quality in real ways. But the puffiness, the specific, bilateral, morning worse, never quite resolving fullness, that is not a volume problem. That is not a skin quality problem. It is a fluid problem. And improving skin quality does not drain fluid. It puts a smoother surface on tissue that is still congested. Some of my patients had spent $10,000, $15,000 on treatment for under-eye puffiness specifically, over years, across multiple providers, with genuine hope each time. They were seeking solutions that made complete sense given what they'd been told about the nature of the problem. And the nature of the problem they'd been given was wrong. Not because anyone was dishonest, but because the connection between lower limb circulation and facial fluid balance was not part of the clinical framework within which facial aesthetics have been understood and treated. This gap between what lymphatic anatomy shows us about this mechanism and what reaches the people who are most affected by it is what I've spent years trying to close. Not completely. The gap is institutional in scale, and I'm one practitioner with a camera, but fraction by fraction. So here's what I want to give you permission to do. You don't need anyone's approval to start tonight. No referral, no specialist review, no second opinion about whether your specific anatomy warrants this approach. The mechanism I've described is human anatomy. It operates in you the same way it operates in everyone who sits for most of the day. Individual variation affects the magnitude of the response. It doesn't change the direction. You have permission to begin without asking anyone. Tomorrow morning, before the phone, before the coffee, before whatever the day requires first, stand where you are. Feet hip width. Rise onto the balls of your feet, fully. Hold 2 seconds. Lower slowly. 12 times. 60 seconds. That's all. 2 weeks from now, look at your face in the same light at the same time of morning as you're looking at it right now. Not waiting for a transformation, watching, with the straightforward attention of someone who has added something consistent to their mornings and wants to know what the body does with it. What the body does with it, in most cases, is visible. And when you see it, when the morning fullness is settling earlier, when the tissue under your eyes looks different at 9 than it used to look at noon, you won't need anyone to explain it. You'll have watched your own face demonstrate the connection from heel to eye socket across 5 feet of continuous tissue that either drains or stagnates, depending entirely on whether the pump at one end is running. Keep it running. If something in this shifted something for you, if you're going to try this, if you've tried it and want to report back, leave a comment. I read them. What people notice in the first 2 weeks, reported in the comments, gives me more confirmation of this mechanism than anything else. that conversation is worth having. And if you want to stay in this work, if you want to keep following the anatomy where it actually leads, rather than where the industry has decided to look, subscribe. This channel doesn't stop at the surface, neither does the body. There's a question I get in the comments almost every time I post something like this, and it's worth answering directly instead of letting it sit unaddressed. Why the calf? Of every muscle group in the body, why is this the one that matters for the face? The honest answer is that it isn't the only one, but it's the biggest lever for the least effort. And here's the anatomy that explains why. The calf houses two muscles that matter for this mechanism. The gastrocnemius, which is the larger, more superficial muscle you can see flex when you rise onto your toes. And beneath it, the soleus. The soleus doesn't get much attention because you can't see it working from the outside. It sits deeper, it doesn't bulge the way the gastrocnemius does, and it's been called med by researchers who study venous and lymphatic return, not by people trying to sell you a fitness program. The second heart. That's not a marketing phrase, it's a functional description. The soleus contains a dense network of valved veins that when the muscle contracts, function almost identically to how the heart's chambers function. They fill, they compress, they push fluid in one direction, and a series of one-way valves prevent backflow. Every time you rise onto the balls of your feet, you are activating a secondary pump that was doing a measurable share of your circulatory and lymphatic work every single day of your life until you started sitting still for 8, 10, 12 hours at a stretch. When that pump goes quiet, it doesn't just affect your legs. That's the part almost nobody explains, and it's the part that made me start filming these videos in the first place. The lymphatic system isn't segmented by body region the way we tend to think about it. It's one continuous network, low pressure, entirely dependent on external compression to move fluid against gravity. The lymphatic system has no central pump of its own, unlike the cardiovascular system's heart. It relies on the contraction of surrounding muscle, on the movement of the diaphragm during breathing, on gravity-assisted drainage, and yes, on the pumping action of muscles like the soleus and gastrocnemius at the furthest point from where you want fluid to go. When that distal pump stops running, the entire system loses pressure. Not just locally, systemically. The fluid that should be moving upward and centrally toward the great veins near the collarbone, where lymph ultimately re-enters the bloodstream, moves more slowly everywhere along the chain. And the face, sitting at the very top of that chain, dependent on drainage pathways that run down through the neck, into the thoracic duct, and eventually all the way to where the pump you just stopped using used to be running, feels it first. Because the face has the least tissue slack to hide fluid accumulation in. A few milliliters of stagnant interstitial fluid in your calf is invisible. The same volume under your eyes is not. That's the anatomy. Now here's the objection I hear most often, and I want to take it seriously instead of waving it away because it's a fair question. I already walk 10,000 steps a day. Doesn't that activate my calf muscles enough? Sometimes. Not always, and here's why. Walking activates the calf, yes, but in short, low amplitude contractions distributed across a long period, often at a cadence and range of motion that doesn't fully engage the soleus's venous pumping capacity. If you're walking on flat ground, in supportive shoes, at a moderate pace, you're getting partial activation, enough to matter, not enough to substitute for a deliberate, full range, sustained contraction like the one in the sequence I described. Think of it the way you'd think about the difference between fidgeting your hand and making a full fist. Both involve the same muscles. Only one of them fully closes the pump chamber and fully empties it. The exercise I gave you, full extension onto the balls of the feet, a real pause at the top, a slow controlled lower, is designed specifically to maximize that chamber emptying effect in a way that incidental walking usually doesn't. This is also why people who stand at desks all day, who assume they're spared because they're not sitting, often see the same puffiness patterns as people who sit. Standing still activates the calf pump almost as little as sitting still does. It's not about weight bearing, it's about the deliberate, repeated, full range contraction and release. There's a second objection, and it's the one I take even more seriously, because it comes from people who've already tried something like this and didn't see what they expected. I did calf raises for a few days and nothing happened. I believe you. And I want to explain why that's exactly what the mechanism predicts, not evidence against it. Lymphatic drainage doesn't operate on the same timeline as, say, a stimulant reaching your bloodstream. You won't see same-day results from restoring a pump that's been dormant for months or years. For the same reason you wouldn't expect a flooded field to fully drain the moment you unclog one downstream culvert. The system has to reestablish flow gradually. Chronic, low-grade lymphatic stagnation, the kind caused by a sedentary lifestyle sustained over months, creates tissue changes that take time to reverse. Mildly reduced lymphatic vessel contractility from disuse, slightly increased tissue fibrosis around chronically congested areas, altered pressure gradients that took months to establish and won't undo themselves in 72 hours. What I've observed, both in my own practice and in the thousands of comments I've read from people who've tried this, is a fairly consistent pattern. The first visible changes tend to show up somewhere between day 9 and day 14 for people who are consistent every single morning. Not day 2, not day 5. The 2-week mark I gave you earlier in this video wasn't arbitrary. It's the point at which enough consecutive days of restored pump activity have accumulated to produce a measurable shift in the baseline fluid load the face is carrying overnight. This is also why I told you to check at the same time of day in the same light. Facial fluid distribution has a natural circadian pattern. It's almost always worse in the morning, after hours of horizontal positioning have let fluid pool toward the face with no gravity assistance and no pump activity to counteract it. And it improves somewhat over the course of a normal day as you move around. If you compare a puffy 9 a.m. face to a settled 6 p.m. face, you'll think you're seeing progress that's actually just the ordinary daily cycle. The comparison that actually tells you something is the same time, the same lighting, 2 weeks apart. That controls for the variable that would otherwise fool you. I also want to address something that comes up in a different form every time I post one of these videos. Sometimes as a genuine question, sometimes as something closer to an accusation. If this actually worked this well, wouldn't my doctor have told me? I understand the instinct behind that question, and I don't think it's unreasonable. But it misunderstands what most clinical training is actually structured around. A general practitioner's education is built for triage, for identifying disease, for ruling out pathology, for deciding whether something needs a specialist, a scan, a prescription. Fluid under the eyes that isn't caused by kidney disease, heart failure, thyroid dysfunction, or an allergic reaction typically gets categorized as cosmetic. And cosmetic concerns are, almost by definition, outside the scope of what a 15-minute primary care visit is designed to address. It's not that the anatomy I've described is controversial or fringe within lymphatic research. The soleus's role as a secondary circulatory pump has been documented in vascular physiology literature for decades. It's that the connection between that pump and facial appearance sits in a gap between specialties. Vascular physiologists don't typically think about faces. Estheticians and dermatologists don't typically think about calf muscles. The person positioned to actually connect those two things is someone who spends their time studying fascia and lymphatic architecture across the entire body as a single connected system, rather than someone trained to look at one region in isolation. That's the gap I mentioned earlier. It isn't a conspiracy. It's a structural blind spot in how medical specialization carves up the body. And it's exactly why a piece of anatomy this basic can be simultaneously well documented and almost entirely unknown to the people it could help most. None of this requires you to distrust your doctor, by the way. If you have real swelling, asymmetric swelling, swelling accompanied by pain, redness, or shortness of breath, that is a medical question, and it belongs with a physician, not with a calf raise routine. What I'm describing is the ordinary, low-grade fluid stagnation that affects most sedentary adults to some degree. Not a diagnosis, not a treatment, just a mechanism most people have never had explained to them. So let me give you the fuller version of the routine, now that you understand why each part matters, in case 60 seconds a day is something you want to build past once you see what it does. The base sequence stays the same. 12 slow calf raises, full range, 2-second hold at the top, slow controlled lower. If you want to progress it after that first 2 weeks, once the pattern feels automatic and you're not thinking about it anymore, add a second set later in the day. Early evening works well for most people since it counteracts the fluid that's accumulated in the lower legs from a day of sitting before that fluid has a chance to redistribute overnight. You can also lengthen the hold at the top from 2 seconds to 4 as it gets easier. The added time under tension increases the volume of blood and lymph pushed through the chamber with each contraction. If you want to go further still, do the sequence on a stair edge or a low step with your heels hanging off the back. That increases the range of motion at the bottom of the movement, which more fully stretches and then more fully contracts the soleus, deepening the pumping effect. None of this is required. The base 60 seconds, done consistently every morning, is enough to see the pattern I've described. The additions are for people who've already seen it and want more. One more thing before I let you go, because I think it matters more than the exercise itself. The point of this video was never really about calf raises. It's about a way of thinking about your own body that I want you to carry into everything else you evaluate. The question of whether a symptom you're experiencing somewhere is actually caused by something happening somewhere else entirely, connected by tissue and fluid pathways that don't respect the boundaries we've drawn on an anatomy chart. The face isn't separate from the neck. The neck isn't separate from the chest. The chest isn't separate from the legs. It's one interconnected system. And most of the frustration people feel when a localized treatment doesn't fix a problem, an eye cream that doesn't touch under-eye puffiness, a jaw exercise that doesn't address jowl heaviness, comes from treating a downstream symptom as though it has a downstream cause, when the actual cause is sitting 5 feet away at the other end of a system that connects the two. That's the lens I want to leave you with, not just for your face, for however you think about your body from here. Tomorrow morning, feet hip width, rise, hold 2 seconds, lower slowly, 12 times, 60 seconds. Then look in the mirror, the same way you're looking into whatever screen is showing you this video right now, and give it 2 weeks before you decide whether it worked. I'll see you in the comments.